I thought I'd just been fired. Turns out, they'd been working to erase me for months. My name is Clay Pearson. I'm 43 years old. I live in Evanston, Illinois, just north of Chicago. My younger brother Drew stood at the head of the boardroom table like he owned the place. Technically, he kinda did now. Same conference room where Dad used to hold morning briefings, back when he was sharp enough to run Pearson Logistics without a whisper in the hallway. Back when loyalty meant something. Drew didn't even look up from the paper. "Effective immediately," he read, voice flat like he was announcing a train delay. "You're relieved of all operational duties. Legal will process your transition." Transition. That was the word they used. Not firing, not demotion. Transition. Like this was some soft landing, not a boot to the ribs. I just sat there, waiting for a punchline. This was the same kid I taught how to throw a curveball, the one who used to wear his baseball glove to the dinner table. And now here he was, calm, clean-shaven, wearing some overpriced startup bro blazer, cutting me loose without flinching. "You serious?" I asked. "That's it?" Drew finally looked up. His face didn't show much. This is about evolution, not emotion. I glanced at Dave Moran, sitting 3 seats down. My right-hand guy. He was at my wedding. He'd held Drew on his lap during the night shift when Mom had the flu. Dave had been here since Dad opened the first dock in Oak Brook in '91. Drew slid an envelope across the table toward him, too. "Early retirement?" I asked, voice harder than I meant. Dave didn't answer. He just took the envelope, opened it, pulled out the paper. His jaw was tight. He read it once, signed the bottom, folded it back up. No eye contact, no protest. "Dave kept this place running after Dad's stroke," I said. "You don't do this to him." Drew gave the same little shrug he always used when he got caught cheating at Monopoly. "We're restructuring." I stared at Dave, like maybe he'd speak up. Tell Drew this was wrong, tell me this was temporary. Instead, Dave slipped a folded sticky note across the table, subtle, didn't even look at me. Then he stood, nodded politely to the board, and walked out. The silence felt like a lid being shut, like air being pulled from the room. I unfolded the note under the table. 5 words. They made me choose Clay. My pulse thudded in my ears. Not, "I'm sorry," not, "It wasn't my call." They made him choose, between me and the job, between the guy who trained him and the kid who wanted a crown, and he chose the paycheck. I sat there, staring at Drew, who leaned back now, real casual, like he was already thinking about his next meeting, like he hadn't just carved my legacy out of the company like a bad shipment. He thought it was over. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this wasn't the first time someone tried to push me out, and thanks to Grandpa, it wasn't going to be the last. Not by a long shot. A quiet Sunday with Grandpa 2 summers ago was the moment everything changed. I just didn't know it then. That boardroom firing, that was just the end of the story Drew thought he was writing. But the real betrayal didn't start there. It started 10 years earlier when Dad had his first stroke. I was 25, halfway through business school at Kellogg when I got the call. One minute I was watching a case study presentation on UPS logistics. The next I was packing a duffel bag and driving back to Chicago on no sleep. The company was a mess. Pearson Logistics, Dad's pride and joy, had $3 million in debt, aging trucks, a labor force hanging on by a thread, and one very angry bank calling 3 times a day. Mom was frantic. Dave was running dispatch from a hospital waiting room, and Drew was out in Portland launching some AI warehouse startup and posting inspirational quotes on LinkedIn. "Keep me posted," he texted. That was about it. So, I stayed. Dropped out of business school, moved back into my childhood bedroom, and set up shop in the old accounting office with a hand-me-down laptop and a stack of past-due invoices. I worked, that's it. No grand plan. No leadership manifesto. Just 12-hour days on the dock, 6-hour nights on spreadsheets, and a slow, quiet crawl from $3 million in the red to $40 million in revenue. I remortgaged my house in 2008 to make payroll, sold half the truck fleet to avoid laying people off. Skipped birthdays, forgot anniversaries. My marriage, God bless Amanda, made it 7 years before she finally looked me in the eye and said, "I can't be 3rd place behind the company and your father." She was right, and Drew, he came home for Christmas that year, wearing a Patagonia vest and complaining about Seattle traffic. I remember sitting on the couch, too tired to stand, while he looked around the office and said, "Man, you look exhausted." Exhausted wasn't even the word. It was a permanent state of being. But I never asked for anything, not a title, not a bonus. I didn't even push for co-CEO when Dad started slipping. It didn't feel right. When Dad passed, Drew flew in, did the eulogy in his soft, professional voice. Our father was a builder, then flew out the next morning. I signed the tax documents and stayed late to help Karen sort through payroll. Someone had to. I never questioned the work, not once, because I believed it mattered. That building something, keeping something alive, was enough. Until that boardroom. Until I saw Dave's signature on that retirement form. Until I read his 5 words on a sticky note. They made me choose, Clay. And that's when I realized the firing wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was how long Drew had been planning it. I went home that night, still in my suit, and pulled out an old photo album. There was one picture from 2006, me, Drew, and Dad at the Oak Brook dock. I looked at my own face, younger, hopeful, sunburned, standing next to the same kid who just cut me loose like I was a warehouse temp. He'd been plotting this for years, slowly, quietly, building a coalition, calling in favors, whispering in board members' ears about modernization and strategic evolution, making me look like the outdated one, the problem to be solved. I didn't see it, because I didn't think like him, but I wasn't blind anymore, and as fate would have it, 2 summers ago, someone else hadn't been blind either. That Sunday at the lake house, I remember how calm the water was. Grandpa sat on the porch in his usual spot, coffee mug in hand, wearing that old Cubs hat from 1984. "Still drink it black?" he asked, handing me a cup. "Always." He didn't say much for a while, just watched the trees, the water. Then he stood, walked inside, and came back with a leather folder. "Your father built the business. You saved it. Don't let anyone rewrite that." I didn't know what he meant, not then, but I took the folder. I took the pen with his initials on the cap. I didn't read it until later, and when I did, I realized that while I'd been working my fingers raw to keep the lights on, Drew had been quietly sharpening the knife. But Grandpa, he'd given me a shield, and Drew never saw it coming. Drew thought he'd shut the door on me, but he forgot who built the damn walls. That Sunday at the lake house, 2 summers ago, didn't feel like much at the time. The sun was out. The wind off Lake Geneva was soft and steady, and Grandpa was in one of his quiet moods, the kind where he didn't say much unless you earned it. I'd brought him a box of cinnamon donuts from the place in Elkhorn he liked. He nodded once when he saw them, grunted his approval, and poured us both coffee in 2 old chipped mugs that had been there since I was a kid. "You still drink it black?" he asked, passing one over. "Always," I said. He didn't look at me when he said it. "You ever think about what comes next, Clay?" I figured he meant the business, or maybe life after Dad. I don't know. Haven't had time to think about it. He took a sip, then stood up, walked inside, and came back with a leather folder and a heavy black pen. The pen had his initials engraved along the barrel, silver inlay over matte brass. I recognized it immediately. Same one he used to sign checks when I was 10, peeking through his office door. "Thought about it for you," he said, handing me the folder. I blinked. "What is it?" "Just read it." I did. Inside, trust documents. Dated, notarized, binding. Legal language I'd seen 100 times over the years, but never expected to see applied to me. 26% ownership of Pearson Logistics, held in a private irrevocable trust. Beneficiary, me. My hands went cold. There was one clause, highlighted in faint pencil, that stuck in my throat like a nail. If terminated without cause, beneficiary assumes full voting rights and veto power, effective immediately. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. "You knew?" I finally said. He nodded. "I saw how things were shifting. Your brother talks smooth, but he's all surface. Doesn't have weight in his bones. Why didn't you tell Dad?" "Would have broken his heart," Grandpa said. "That generation believes blood wins out in the end." I kept staring at the papers. "Don't use it unless you have to," he added, voice firm now. "But if that day comes, don't hesitate." I nodded. folded the papers, slid them back into the folder. I didn't thank him. Not out of rudeness, just didn't have the words yet. When I got home that night, I put the folder in my gun safe, right next to the paperwork for my house deed and the title to my dad's old Chevy. I didn't touch it for almost 2 years, not even when Drew started showing up more. Not when he began sitting in on board meetings. Not when he rebranded the company website to drop Dad's name from the About page. I told myself loyalty mattered more than leverage. That was my mistake, because now that the knife was in my back, I finally understood what Grandpa had meant. I wasn't just a fired employee. I was now the company's largest single voting authority, and Drew had no clue what I still had in my pocket. I came to Martin with a folder and a pen, and left with a plan. 2 days after the boardroom ambush, I finally found the nerve to log into my old work email. Technically, IT had revoked access. That's what the HR memo said. But no one had gotten around to scrubbing the server. Probably thought I'd slink off quietly, lick my wounds, and write a LinkedIn post about career transitions. They didn't know me. The first thing I did was start archiving my old messages, backups, insurance. But then I noticed something in the draft folder. A file someone had started but never sent. Subject line, Clay phase-out strategy. I clicked. It wasn't a joke. It was a bullet point roadmap. Cold.clinical. Strategize down to the quarter. Begin transition narrative Q2. Minimize Clay's visibility in client meetings. Shiftboard perception of Clay from operator to legacy holdover. Use family language early, replace with performance language later. Final objective, exit via non-adversarial mutual transition. The document was 6 months old. 6 months. That meant Drew had been working on this before Dad even passed. I sat back, stomach twisting. This wasn't about modernization. It wasn't about evolution. It wasn't even about me being in the way. It was about erasure. They hadn't just fired me. They'd been quietly rewriting the narrative, painting me as the stubborn relic, while Drew positioned himself as the breath of fresh air, and it worked. Almost. I dug deeper, found meeting logs in a shared legal folder. Ones Drew must have forgotten to lock. Agenda notes from Executive Transition Subcommittee. Strategy memos referring to control realignment. It all reeked of something more than just succession planning. Then I hit something bigger, a contract draft. Buried in archived legal templates, it was labeled Ecotrans Solutions Vendor Agreement. At first glance, it looked like any other partnership document, but the address on the cover page jumped out, Portland, Oregon. I opened it, scrolled down, and there it was. Ecotrans Solutions, LLC, a shell company, just a P.O. box and a law firm name. Registered agent, Dana Hollis. I froze. Dana wasn't just anyone. She was Drew's ex-girlfriend, a sustainability consultant he used to bring to Thanksgiving before they mutually uncoupled. And now she was the primary beneficiary of a 5-year vendor contract worth $12.8 million. My jaw clenched. It wasn't just about pushing me out. It was about funneling Pearson's future into the hands of someone Drew could control, or worse, someone who was controlling him. I downloaded everything. Every PDF, every memo, every timestamp. Then I drove. Martin Locke hadn't changed a bit. Still had the same mahogany desk, the same frame Bulls ticket stub on the wall. He barely glanced at the folder when I dropped it on his desk. Grandpa's trust still ironclad? I asked. He nodded slowly. Stronger than iron. I handed him the pen. The same one Grandpa gave me at the lake house. Martin looked down at it, then up at me. Your grandfather expected this, he said quietly, and he prepared for it. That was all he said, but in that moment, I understood. I hadn't been fired, I'd been challenged. And the next move, it was mine. I wasn't just reinstated, I became the wall between them and a lawsuit. The next board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. Sharp, Drew's idea of setting a professional tone, so I showed up at 8:58 uninvited. I wore the same dark gray suit I used to wear when Dad would take me to his quarterly strategy reviews, same tie even. Blue with silver stripes. I hadn't worn it in years, but that morning I laid it out like armor, The receptionist didn't say a word when I walked through the lobby, just stared like she'd seen a ghost. Good. Drew was mid-pitch when I pushed the conference door open. A glossy deck projected behind him showed some nonsense about modernizing our logistics infrastructure. I think the word agile was on the screen. Morning, I said, loud enough for every head in the room to turn. I walked in slowly, carrying a manila envelope in one hand. Won't take long. Drew froze. Clay. I dropped the trust documents on the table with a quiet thump. Not dramatic, not performative, just final. Then I took the empty seat at the head of the table, the one Drew had claimed 6 months ago when he started calling himself executive chair. What's this? He asked, trying to keep his voice even. Grandpa's trust, I said. Filed, notarized, active. It names me the beneficiary of 26% of the company, with full voting rights and veto power, triggered automatically upon a termination without cause. A silence fell over the room, not just quiet, but loaded, the kind where even breathing feels too loud. You weren't fired, Drew said. You were transitioned, I cut in, without cause. No one spoke, not even Elena Griggs, our lead investor, who always had something to say. Right on cue, the boardroom door opened again, and in walked Martin Locke. He didn't say a word, just made his way to the far seat, set his leather briefcase on the table, and waited. Drew's face tightened. Martin? Mr. Pearson asked me to attend, Martin said, dry as toast. For clarity. I looked at the board, then back at Drew. There's more. From the folder, I pulled a flash drive, pushed it across the table. One of the younger board members, I think his name was Mitchell, picked it up, turned it over like he wasn't sure if it might bite him. Plug it in, I said. He did. A few seconds later, the room filled with audio. Drew's voice clear as day. The concourse freight route alone is worth 10. That's a good faith inroad. No one's asking questions. They're just happy it's branded green. Pause. We'll route the next round through the LLC. Make it look like sustainability, not acquisition. The room was dead still. You could have heard a phone vibrate across the table, because what Drew was describing wasn't just sketchy. It was potentially criminal. A conflict of interest. A private transfer of multi-million-dollar assets to a shell company tied to someone he had a personal relationship with. And suddenly, his smug smile was gone. Where did you get that? He asked. The file name had given it away. dfinal.mp3. Dave's final gift. He'd chosen Drew that day in the boardroom, but he hadn't trusted him, and somehow, quietly, carefully, he made sure I had the last piece I needed. Clay, Drew started, I raised a hand. You said this wasn't about emotion. That's fine. Let's stick to facts. I leaned back, calm, centered, steady. You removed me illegally, breached trust agreements, transferred client contracts to a shell, and misrepresented it to this board. If I were anyone else, I'd sue you by lunch. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I turned to Martin. We ready? Martin nodded. I looked around the table. I'm not asking for a vote, I said. I'm invoking the clause. Effective immediately, I hold controlling shares, and as of now, I'm reinstating myself as interim CEO. No one stopped me. No one even blinked, because deep down, they all knew I wasn't just back. I was the last wall standing between them and the collapse Drew almost delivered. The silence after I played the audio was thick, heavier than the soundproof walls could hold. For a long second, no one moved. Then Drew leaned forward, voice tight with forced calm. That recording's out of context. It was a hypothetical vendor discussion, not a finalized deal. Martin didn't even blink. The trust clause doesn't care about context, Mr. Pearson. It cares about breach. Drew scoffed, shaking his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You people can't be serious. That's when Elena Griggs, the board's lead investor and probably the sharpest person in the room, leaned in. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Elena Griggs, she said, turning slightly toward me. Portfolio lead for Slate Harbor Ventures. Clay's the reason this company survived the last decade. Drew's been here 6 months and already selling pieces off to hidden parties. I don't do trust falls with people like that. She slid a piece of paper across the table toward Martin. My vote's yes. Reinstate Clay as interim CEO, effective today. Another board member, Alan Price, old school logistics guy who used to spar with my dad over margins, raised his hand without speaking, then another, then two more. Martin took a moment to glance around the room, motioned to reinstate Clay Pearson as interim CEO of Pearson Logistics, he said. All in favor? 7 hands went up. Against? Drew's hand didn't move. One abstention? Martin asked. Harper Lynn, one of Drew's recent recruits, looked around nervously. Her hand twitched, then stayed still. I'll abstain, she said. Martin nodded. Motion passes, 7-1. Still, Drew didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the table, jaw locked, like if he didn't acknowledge what was happening, it wouldn't be real. You done? I asked him quietly. No answer. I pushed my chair back, stood, and adjusted my cuff. Not for drama, just muscle memory. Then I walked over to the head of the table, the same spot Grandpa used to sit it back when we were nothing but a Midwest freight outfit running milk routes and furniture freight. I sat down slowly, rested both hands flat on the wood, and looked straight ahead. Drew stood, finally, picked up his papers. Didn't say a word, didn't make a speech, didn't even look at me. He walked out the door like a man who already knew the cameras had stopped rolling. I didn't follow him, didn't need to. Sometimes silence is louder than anything you could say. I let it speak for me. And the board, they heard it. That was the easy part, believe it or not. Beating Drew wasn't the real fight. The hard part was what came next, fixing what he almost ruined. Because Delilah, our former HR lead, and the architect behind my so-called transition, hadn't just been firing me, she was about to gut every single part of the company tied to Dad's legacy. The client contracts, the regional hubs, the workforce loyalty programs Dad swore by. And she wasn't doing it out of spite, she was doing it out of strategy. Because Drew hadn't come to take over. He'd come to replace everything we ever built. Not everyone moved on. Some stayed behind to help. But not all of them came clean at first. My first week back felt like walking into a house after a break-in. Things were where I left them, mostly, but nothing felt right. Half the walls were painted a different color. The old guard had been scattered to the wind. The floor plan looked familiar, but the energy was off, like it had been sterilized. Delilah was gone. She resigned the day after the vote, before I could even call her in. Left her badge on her desk like a mic drop. Good riddance. I didn't need people who could smile while stabbing. The Innovation Task Force, Drew's pet project of consultants and slide deck merchants, was the first thing I shut down. They never added value, just buzzwords. Then I brought back the people who did. Elise Martinez was the first name I called, logistics director for the Midwest Hub. Been with us since 2006. Drew demoted her to Strategic Transition Advisor 4 months ago, which basically meant email purgatory and a parking spot downgrade. When I offered her the rollback, she broke down crying mid-call. I thought I'd never hear your voice again, she said, her voice shaking. She showed up the next morning like she never left. Same tired brown heels, same navy blue sweater with a little hole near the wrist. She brought coffee for the entire dispatch crew. Back where I belong, she said, smiling through red eyes. Next was Dave. I called him last, not out of hesitation, but respect. We'd barely spoken since the sticky note. That 5-word message still echoed in my head. They made me choose Clay. But when I asked if he'd consider coming back as operations consultant, he didn't ask for conditions. He just said, "When do I start?" And just like that, the engine turned over again. We started plugging the leaks, and there were plenty. Client trust had eroded. Vendors were cagey. Word of Drew's shady contract attempts had gotten around faster than anyone realized. Concourse Shipping, one of our oldest clients, a 10-year partnership rooted in handshake deals and back-of-napkin rate promises, had been preparing to walk. Their COO, Dana Kim, agreed to a final meeting. She didn't smile when I walked into the room. "I've heard 5 different explanations for what the hell's going on over there," she said. "I need one." So I gave her one. Plain and simple. "My brother tried to turn this place into a brochure," I said. "But I'm the one who built the trucks he forgot to put in the pictures." She stared for a moment, then her shoulders dropped just a little. "We don't trust rebrands," she said. "We trust Clay." That night, I signed the renewed contract using Grandpa's old pen, the same one he handed me at the lake house. The weight of it in my hand grounded me. That pen had closed his first freight deal back in '78. Now it was keeping us alive in 2025. The contract, 10 years. Locked in. We weren't just surviving, we were rebuilding. But even as I started to breathe again, I knew one thing. Not everyone still here was here for the right reasons. Because when you sweep up after a storm, some things under the rug come crawling out. One of Drew's youngest hires, Yaimi, just 27, had stayed behind. Quiet, polite. Too quiet. I figured he was just a kid in over his head. But then one morning, he knocked on my office door with shaking hands, and everything shifted again. Just when I thought the dust had settled, Grandpa had one last word waiting for me. It was Thursday, late morning, the kind of gray, heavy-skied Chicago day where everything feels quieter than it should. I was reviewing freight contracts when there was a soft knock at my door, not a confident one, more like someone unsure they should even be there. "Yeah?" I called. Yaimi poked his head in. Young guy, 27. Always wore fitted dress shirts like he was still trying to impress recruiters. Nervous eyes, but a good heart. I'd felt it early on, even if he'd been too quiet during the Drew mess. "You got a second?" he asked. I nodded. "Come in." He shut the door behind him and stood just inside, shoulders tense, one hand fidgeting with a USB drive. "Off the record?" he said. That got my attention. I leaned back in my chair. "Sure." He stepped forward, placed the drive on my desk like it was a loaded weapon, and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for weeks. "Drew wanted me to monitor legacy loyalty," he said. That's what he called it. I didn't say anything. He asked me to keep tabs on anyone over 40, especially people who used to report to you or Dave. Said it was about identifying resistance nodes. His words, not mine. "You do it?" I asked, eyes on him. He shook his head quickly. "No, but I recorded everything." I raised an eyebrow. He tapped the USB with one shaky finger. "Just in case." I picked it up, turned it over in my hand. "What's on here?" "Meetings, Slack logs, internal notes." He had this whole thing mapped out. Wanted to fire Elise before the quarter ended. Said she was a sentimental liability. He was pushing to cancel the concourse renewal, too. Said they were too old-fashioned for his long-term vision. I stared at him. "Why are you showing me this now?" His voice cracked, but he didn't look away. "Because you stayed." He swallowed hard. "When everyone else either bailed or betrayed you, you showed up, took the hits, took the seat back, and then offered it right back to the people who earned it." He paused. "I didn't fold, but I didn't speak up either. Not until now." I nodded slowly. "That counts," I said. "More than you know?" He blinked. "You're not mad?" "I've had enough people lie to me, Jaime," I said. "Takes guts to do what you just did." He let out a breath, smiled, small but real, and I could see something settle in his shoulders for the first time since I'd met him. "I'm not firing you," I said. He laughed nervously. "I figured. But, if there's any way I can help clean up, you're promoted." He froze. "What?" "You're smart, you're loyal, you're observant, and you didn't fold under pressure." I stood and extended my hand. "Welcome to strategy." His jaw dropped, but he took my hand. "Seriously?" "Seriously," I said. "The old school stuff, that's not about age, it's about values." He nodded, still stunned. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Hey, Jaime." "Yeah?" "If anyone else still has secrets they're scared to share, you send them my way. Quiet loyalty is great, but earned trust is louder." He smiled. "Understood." When the door clicked shut behind him, I turned back to my desk. That's when I saw it. A plain envelope I didn't remember setting there. No postage, no name, just one thing, Grandpa's signature, scrawled in dark ink across the seal, and suddenly it all came rushing back. The pen, the trust, the lake house. He wasn't done speaking yet, not even from the grave. Clarity comes after betrayal, but once you see clearly, don't look away. That's how the letter began. I sat at my desk alone, lights off, blinds closed, the faint hum of a loading truck reversing somewhere in the yard. The envelope was soft and worn, like it had been handled too many times before someone hid it in my drawer. Grandpa's handwriting was unmistakable, all angles and pressure, black ink on thick paper. I hadn't seen it since the day we buried him. I hadn't heard from him since the lake house. But now he was speaking again. Clarity comes after betrayal, but once you see clearly, don't look away. Your brother isn't your enemy. Confusion is. I stopped there for a second. Let that line sink in. He didn't say Drew wasn't wrong. He didn't say to forgive. He said Drew wasn't the enemy, that the bigger danger, the one I hadn't wanted to face, was the part of me that still wanted peace more than truth. That same part that let Drew build a quiet coup while I looked the other way. If you still hold your name, your purpose, and your pen, you haven't lost. I looked over at the pen, Grandpa's pen, the same one I'd used to sign the concourse deal last week, the same one he used to draft our first union agreement in '81, the same one he pressed into my hand on that porch 2 summers ago. It sat there now, perfectly still, right where it belonged. The rest of the letter was short, simple. He didn't offer a playbook, didn't scold, didn't even mention the trust documents. What he gave me wasn't advice, it was direction. You were never meant to hold this company. You were meant to carry it, for the ones who build, not just talk. When you feel tired, remember, names fade, but legacies move freight. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into the back of my desk drawer, right next to my dad's old notebook and a tiny Polaroid of our first warehouse in South Holland. That letter didn't bring closure. It brought momentum. I wasn't here to win. I was here to restore. By Friday morning, I was back on the floor, in steel-toe boots, walking rows with Dave, talking routes with Elise, watching Jaime light up like a kid every time someone asked for his opinion. We were stabilizing. We were turning heads again. The industry was watching. And then, just after sunrise on Monday, I got an email. Subject line, Apex Merger Terms, Confidential Draft. From Merger Initiatives ApexLogics.com. There it was, the same firm Drew tried to sell us to under the radar. Now they were reaching out directly. But this time, they only wanted to talk. If I was at the table, and the terms, they were mine to write. I got the email at 6:00 a.m., sharp subject line, Apex X Pearson. Leadership-led, merger proposal. Sender, William Stokes, Apex Logistics Group. Short message, no pleasantries, no buzzwords. Mr. Pearson, in light of recent leadership changes at Pearson Logistics and the stabilization under your direction, Apex would like to revisit potential partnership opportunities, contingent on your continued role and approval of structural terms. Respectfully, W. Stokes. They didn't want Drew. They didn't even want a buyout. They wanted a merger, but only if I stayed in charge. Funny how fast the weather changes once the storm passes. I read it twice, then slid my phone into my desk drawer beside Grandpa's letter and that worn-down pen. I sat back, fingers laced, staring out my office window. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I called a meeting. I brought in Elise, Dave, Jaime, and our finance lead, Carla. Everyone who had stood by this place when Drew tried to turn it into a pitch deck. I printed the email, dropped it in the middle of the conference table, and let them read it in silence. Dave looked up first. They serious? Looks that way, I said. Carla folded her arms. They wouldn't put it in writing if they weren't. Jaime leaned forward. Do we trust them? I thought about that. Not yet, I said. But they trust me, and that's the leverage we never had before. Elise nodded slowly. So, what do you want to do? I looked around the room, at the people who stuck it out, patched the walls, swept up the broken glass. I don't want a merger that buries us in buzzwords, I said. If we do this, we do it right. Our people, our name, our standards, they integrate with us, not the other way around. Dave cracked a grin. You're talking terms. I smiled. I'm talking boundaries. So I wrote back. William, I'm open to a conversation. But let's be clear up front. Pearson Logistics retains brand identity for all Midwest and Northeast operations. All current staff and leadership stay intact. Apex advisory roles only. No override of freight routing, union negotiations, or vendor contracts. Final approval authority remains with the current board, chaired by me. If that's a deal breaker, no hard feelings. Clay Pearson. I hit send. 15 minutes later, I got a reply. Understood. Let's talk. Your terms sound fair. We weren't just rebuilding now. We were being sought out. That afternoon, I stood in the same boardroom where Drew tried to erase me. Only this time, the seats were full of people I trusted. Not just yes men or advisors in $800 shoes. Real workers, real contributors. I pulled out Grandpa's pen, rolled it between my fingers. Then I signed the preliminary agreement. Not a sale, not a handover. A partnership, built on legacy, backed by truth, designed to last. When I walked out, I didn't look for applause. I didn't need it. I just felt the weight of the door as it clicked shut behind me. Not as a trap this time, but as a mark of closure. The same kid they tried to phase out. He wrote the final line, with the same damn pen that built this company in the first place.